The red dust swirled like dried blood across the valley floor, carried on a wind that tasted of sage and coming rain. Claire O'Hara pressed her palm against the rough adobe wall of the way station, steadying herself as another gust threatened to tear the worn cotton bonnet from her head. 24 years old and 3 days out from her father's ranch, she already felt like a different woman than the one who'd slammed that heavy oak door behind her. "Stage ain't coming through till tomorrow, miss," the station keeper called from his perch on a wooden crate. His tobacco-stained beard moved as he spoke, reminding Claire of a goat chewing cud. "Storm's got the whole schedule turned sideways." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. In her carpet bag, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the paper that had changed everything her father's debt agreement, signed and witnessed, selling away half their ranch to Luther Briggs of the San Juan and Western Railroad Company. The signature looked right, but something about that witness mark made her stomach turn. Eli Standish, deputy sheriff. She'd seen the man's penmanship on wanted posters, and this wasn't it. The wind picked up again, and with it came the sound of horses. Not the steady clip-clop of travelers, but the urgent thunder of pursuit. Claire's hand moved instinctively to the small pistol her father had taught her to use, hidden in the folds of her traveling dress. 3 riders burst over the ridge, dust devils spinning in their wake. The lead man's face was masked by a red bandana, his eyes cold as creek stones above the fabric. They wheeled their mounts toward the station, and Claire knew with sudden clarity that she should have accepted Luther's proposal, should have smiled and nodded and become Mrs. Briggs like everyone expected. At least then she'd be behind walls instead of standing in the open like a lamb at market. "Well, well," the leader said, dismounting with practiced ease. "What have we here, station keeper? You didn't tell us you had company." The old man spat tobacco juice, missing his brass spittoon by a foot. "Didn't know I had to report to every trail rat that rides through." The masked man's companion, a wiry fellow with nervous hands, laughed. It was an ugly sound. "Trail rats, that's no way to talk to paying customers." His gaze slid to Claire like oil on water. "Though I'm thinking we might find better merchandise than whatever's in your strongbox." Claire's fingers tightened on her pistol, but she knew the mathematics of violence, 3 armed men against 1 woman who'd only ever shot bottles and rabbits. The numbers didn't favor her. That's when she saw him. He moved like smoke through the sagebrush, a shadow among shadows despite the harsh noon sun. One moment the space beside the water trough was empty. The next, a man stood there as if he'd grown from the earth itself. His skin was burnished copper, his hair black as obsidian, bound back with a strip of blue cloth. He wore a mix of traditional Navajo dress and practical frontier gear deerskin leggings, a cotton shirt, a gun belt that had seen better days. "The lady's not for sale," he said, his voice carrying the musical accent of the din. Each word was placed with the same precision he'd used to appear from nowhere. The nervous outlaw went for his gun. He was fast, but the Navajo was faster. The crack of the rifle seemed to come from the earth itself, and suddenly, the outlaw's pistol was spinning through the air. His hand clutched to his chest, cursing. "Kolar Nez," the leader said, and Claire heard something new in his voice. Respect cut with fear. "Didn't know you were back in Four Corners territory." "Many things happen without your knowledge," Kolar replied. He hadn't moved, but somehow he seemed larger, more present, as if the land itself stood with him. "Take your men, ride north, don't come back." The mathematics had changed, 3 against 2, with one of the 2 being Kolar Nez, apparently meant something different in this hard country. The leader looked at Claire, at Kolar, at his wounded companion, and made his choice. "This ain't over, breed," he spat, but he was already backing toward his horse. "No," Kolar agreed. "But it is for today." They rode off in a cloud of dust and curses, the wounded man clutching his saddle horn with his good hand. Claire realized she'd been holding her breath and let it out slowly. "Thank you," she managed. Kolar's dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her want to smooth her travel-worn dress. "You're the O'Hara daughter, the one who refused Luther Briggs." It wasn't a question, but Claire nodded anyway. "News travels fast out here." "Bad news travels faster." He tilted his head, a gesture that reminded her of a hawk studying prey. "Why are you alone? Where is your protection?" "I protect myself," Claire said, lifting her chin. A smile ghosted across his weathered features. "With that," he nodded at the small bulge in her dress where her pistol hid. "A derringer against 3 men. Brave, but foolish. I wasn't planning on meeting bandits. No one plans for wolves. They come anyway." He moved then, just a shift of weight, but Claire noticed how he kept himself between her and the direction the outlaws had fled. "Where do you go?" "You." "Coyote Bend. I'm to be a tutor there." His eyebrows rose. "Tutor to whose children?" "Whoever will hire me." The truth tasted bitter. "I have letters of recommendation. I can read and write in both English and Latin, and I know my numbers well enough to keep books." "And your father agrees to this?" Claire's jaw tightened. "My father has debts. What he agrees to doesn't much matter anymore." Kolar was quiet for a long moment, and Claire became aware of how the wind had died down, how the silence of the desert pressed in around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, the sound lonely as a graveyard bell. "I'm heading to Coyote Bend," he said finally. "My sister lives there. We can travel together." "I don't need—" "Those men were Briggs's dogs," Kolar interrupted. "They weren't here by accident. You think they'll give up because I frightened them once?" The truth of it hit Claire like cold water. Of course Luther would send men after her. A woman who'd rejected him, who'd run rather than submit his pride, wouldn't stand for it. And if she happened to meet with an accident on the trail, well, the desert was full of dangers. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "I know Luther Briggs," Kolar said, and there was flint in his voice. "I know the railroad. I know what they plan for my people's grazing lands. And I know—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know what it is to stand against them." The station keeper cleared his throat. "If you folks are done with your parley, might want to move inside. Sky's got that look about it." Claire glanced up and saw he was right. Clouds were building over the distant mesas, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. In this country, flash floods could turn a dry wash into a killing torrent in minutes. "We'll leave at first light," Kolar said. It wasn't a question. Claire wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, but she'd been raised practical. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with Briggs' men on her trail and her father's freedom, maybe his life hanging on whatever she could prove about that forged signature. "First light," she agreed. Inside the station, she purchased a bowl of beans and cornbread that tasted like sawdust, then retired to the small room set aside for female travelers. It was barely more than a closet with a straw mattress, but it had a door that locked, and right now that felt like luxury. Through the thin walls, she could hear Kolar talking to the station keeper in a mixture of English and what she assumed was Navajo. The musical rise and fall of the unfamiliar language was oddly soothing. Her mother, God rest her soul, had tried to teach Claire a few words of Irish Gaelic before the fever took her, but Patrick O'Hara had forbidden it. "We're Americans now," he'd said. "No good comes from looking back." But what good had come from looking forward? Her father had tried so hard to fit into this new world, to be the successful rancher, the respectable citizen. And where had it led? To debt and lies, and his daughter running through the desert like a fugitive. Claire pulled out the debt agreement and studied it by the light of a single candle. The main signature was perfect, each loop and line exactly as her father would write it. But that witness signature, she'd stake her life that Eli Standish had never written those letters. The question was, who had, and why? Thunder rumbled overhead, and the first fat drops of rain began to strike the roof. Claire folded the paper carefully and returned it to its oilcloth wrapping. Tomorrow she'd be in Coyote Bend. Tomorrow she'd start finding answers. A knock at her door made her freeze. "Miss O'Hara?" It was Kolar's voice. "I'm leaving blankets outside your door. Desert rain makes for cold nights." She waited until his footsteps faded before opening the door. 2 thick wool blankets lay folded on the floor, smelling of sage and wood smoke. On top of them was something else, a strip of blue cloth like the one in his hair, woven with a pattern of mountains and stars. Claire picked it up, running her fingers over the tight weave. It was beautiful work, each thread placed with intention and skill. At the end. A token. She didn't know enough about Navajo customs to guess. Outside, the storm was building, turning the desert into a drum. Lightning flickered, illuminating her small room in stark flashes. Claire wrapped herself in the blankets, tied the blue cloth around her wrist like a bracelet, and tried not to think about tomorrow. But her last thought before sleep took her was of dark eyes and a voice like distant thunder, and the way Kolar Nez had stood between her and danger as if he'd been born to the role. In Boston or New York, such protection might have felt constraining. Here, with the desert singing its harsh song outside her window, it felt like the first real safety she'd known since finding that forged paper. The coyote called again, closer now, and Claire pulled the blankets tighter. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, for the first time in days, she didn't feel entirely alone. Coyote Bend sprawled across the desert like a dog lying in the sun, lazy, dusty, and liable to bite if provoked. Claire counted 23 buildings as she and Kolar descended the last ridge, most of them adobe or rough-hewn timber, their walls the same red-brown as the earth they rose from. The largest structure was the Silver Dollar Saloon, its false front proclaiming civilization while its warped boards whispered the truth. There, Kolar pointed to a modest house near the town's edge, where smoke rose from a chimney despite the morning heat. "Josiah Cole, he's the man you want to see about tutoring work." Claire had expected him to lead her to the school, but Kolar had explained during their journey that Coyote Bend's schoolhouse had burned down 2 months ago accidentally. Everyone said, though the timing was curious given that the teacher had been vocal about railroad land grabs. "A blacksmith needs a tutor," she asked. A blacksmith who was a freeman before the war, who taught himself to read from the Bible, and who has 2 children he'd die before seeing grow up ignorant. Kolar's voice held deep respect. "He's also the closest thing we have to a minister since Father Miguel died." They'd talked during the ride, careful conversations that skirted around the edges of deeper things. Claire had learned that Kolar's sister Atsa was known for her weaving, that their mother had died when Atsa was young, that he'd served as a scout for the army before realizing he was helping them map routes that would later be used against his people. "Thank you," Claire said as they approached the town proper. "For everything." He looked at her sideways, and she caught that almost smile again. "Wait until you meet Coyote Bend before thanking me." The first person they encountered was a Mexican woman sweeping the steps of what appeared to be a boarding house. She took one look at Kolar and crossed herself, muttering something that might have been a prayer or a curse. "Doña Marta." Kolar greeted her politely. She spat in the dust near his horse's hooves. "I got nothing for you. Indio, no food, no water, no welcome." "I'm not asking for anything, just bringing Miss O'Hara to town." The woman's sharp eyes fixed on Claire, taking in her travel-stained dress, her carpet bag, the blue cloth still tied around her wrist. Something in her expression shifted. O'Hara, the rancher's daughter. When Claire nodded, Doña Marta's face underwent another transformation. "Ah, the one who told Luther Briggs where he could put his marriage proposal. Come, Nina, you must be tired. I have a room, clean and cheap." Thank you, but I need to see about work first." "Work?" The older woman laughed, but it wasn't unkind. "A lady looking for work in Coyote Bend. What times we live in." She jerked her chin toward the center of town. Best stop at Murphy's first. Let him know you're here. He runs the general store. Also serves as mayor when we pretend we have such things. They moved on, and Claire became aware of eyes following them, faces in windows. Men lounging outside the saloon. Women pausing in their errands. The attention wasn't friendly, especially the looks directed at Kolar. "Is it always like this?" she asked quietly. "Today is good," he replied. "No one's thrown anything yet." Murphy's general store squatted on Main Street like a toad made of timber and false promises. The proprietor, a thin man with calculating eyes, looked up from his ledger as they entered. His gaze slid from Claire to Kolar, and his mouth tightened. "We don't trade with Indians here," he said flatly. "I'm not here to trade," Kolar replied, voice calm as still water. "Just escorting Miss O'Hara." Murphy's demeanor changed like a weather vane in shifting wind. "Miss O'Hara? Of course. We heard you might be coming our way. Welcome to Coyote Bend." He came around the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "I'm Thomas Murphy, proprietor, and, well, what passes for authority when the sheriff's not around? Which is most days, truth be told." "Where is Sheriff Daniels?" Claire asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Oh, he's got a wide territory to cover. Spends most of his time up in Cedar Ridge. Deputy Standish handles things here." Claire's pulse quickened. "Eli Standish. You know him?" Murphy's eyes sharpened with interest. "By reputation," Claire said carefully. "Well, he keeps order, mostly. Though between you and me," Murphy lowered his voice conspiratorially, "he's got his own way of doing things. Very friendly with certain business interests, if you take my meaning." The shop door opened. And speak of the devil. Eli Standish himself walked in. He was younger than Claire had expected. Perhaps 30, with pale eyes and a mustache waxed to points. His deputy's star caught the light as he moved, and his hand rested casual-like on the Colt at his hip. Well, he said, looking Claire up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Miss O'Hara, Luther said you might turn up here." His gaze shifted to Kolar, and his expression hardened. "You thought I told you to keep to your own kind." "I go where I please," Kolar said. "That's so." Standish stepped closer, and Claire smelled whiskey and tobacco on him. "Maybe you need a reminder about the weapons ordinance. No Indians carrying guns in town limits." "Since when?" Murphy asked, frowning. "Since I say so." Standish's smile was all teeth. "Hand it over, breed." Claire saw Kolar's jaw tighten, but he reached slowly for his gun belt. She stepped forward without thinking. "That's not right. He saved me from bandits on the trail. He has every right." "Ma'am," Standish interrupted. "You're new here, so I'll explain how things work. I keep the peace. Part of keeping the peace means making sure certain elements don't get ideas above their station. Now, your friend here can have his iron back when he leaves town. That's more generous than some would be." Kolar unbuckled his gun belt and handed it over. The movement was controlled, but Claire saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful blankness of his expression. "Good boy," Standish said, and Claire felt her hands clench into fists. "Now run along. I'm sure you've got sheep to tend or something." "I need to see my sister first," Kolar said. 5 minutes, Standish said. "Then you're gone. I see you in town after that. We'll have a different kind of conversation." Kolar nodded once, then looked at Claire. "Cole's smithy is 2 streets over, the house with blue window frames. Tell him I sent you." Then he was gone, moving with that same fluid grace, and Claire was left facing Standish's knowing smirk. "Now Luther's mighty concerned about you," the deputy said. "Says you took something that belongs to him." "I took nothing but what was mine." "That's so." He stepped closer, and Claire forced herself not to back away. "Well, maybe we should have a look in that bag of yours, just to be sure." "Leave the lady be, Eli." The voice was deep and calm. A black man stood in the doorway, arms thick as tree trunks from his work at the forge. This had to be Josiah Cole. "Miss O'Hara, I heard you might be looking for work." "Mr. Cole," Claire said with relief. "Yes, I am." "Then come along. My Sarah's got noon meal cooking, and we can talk." He looked at Standish with steady eyes. "That is, if the deputy's done with his business." Standish's hand twitched near his gun. "One of these days, Cole, you're going to forget your place." "My place is right here," Josiah said simply. "Where God put me, same as yours, I reckon." The two men stared at each other for a long moment before Standish spat on the floor and stalked out. Murphy let out a breath he'd been holding. "You'll want to be careful," the shopkeeper said. "Standish has Luther Briggs's backing, and that makes him near untouchable." "Near isn't the same as completely," Josiah observed. "Miss O'Hara, shall we—" Claire followed him out, aware of the whispers that followed in their wake. The smithy was indeed 2 streets over, a solid building with blue-painted window frames that seemed to defy the dust and despair of the rest of the town. Behind it stood a small house with a vegetable garden that somehow thrived despite the desert climate. "Sarah," Josiah called. "We have company." A woman emerged from the house, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was beautiful in the way of women who've learned that beauty is less important than strength, her hair wrapped in a colorful cloth, her smile warm but cautious. "This is Miss O'Hara," Josiah said. "The one Kolar mentioned." Sarah's expression softened. "If Kolar Nez vouches for you, then you're welcome here. Come, sit. You look ready to drop." Inside, the house was small but spotless, with books stacked on every surface and 2 children working at slates at the kitchen table. They looked up as Claire entered a boy of perhaps 10 and a girl of 7, both with their father's steady gaze and their mother's quick intelligence. "Samuel, Ruth, this might be your new teacher," Sarah said. The children exchanged glances. "Can she shoot?" Samuel asked. "Samuel," his mother scolded. "It's important," the boy insisted. "Last teacher couldn't shoot, and look what happened to the schoolhouse." "That was an accident," Josiah said, but Claire heard the doubt in his voice. "I can shoot," Claire said. "My father taught me." "Good," Ruth piped up. "Can you read Latin Papa's teaching us? But he says his pronunciation's probably wrong." "I can." "And sums?" Samuel asked. "Complicated ones. Papa says if we're going to keep the books for the smithy someday, we need to know more than just adding and subtracting." "Yes." The children looked at each other again, seeming to communicate silently. Then Ruth smiled. "You'll do." Over a meal of beans, cornbread, and surprisingly fresh greens from the garden, they discussed terms. Josiah could pay little in cash, but they could offer a room in the loft and meals. Other families might hire her too. The Changs who ran the laundry had 3 children, and even some of the Mexican families might be interested if the price was right. "What about the Navajo families?" Claire asked. "Do any of their children—" "No," Sarah said quickly. "That wouldn't be wise?" "Why not?" Josiah and Sarah exchanged looks. "Things are tense enough," Josiah said finally. "The railroad's been surveying, making promises to some, threats to others. The reservation boundaries are disputed. Having their children in town, learning alongside white children." He shook his head. "It would cause trouble we don't need." Claire thought of Kolar, of the dignity in his bearing and the injustice of Standish taking his gun. Maybe trouble is what this town needs. "Maybe," Josiah agreed. "But not yet. We need to be smart about this. Miss O'Hara, change comes slow out here, and pushing too hard too fast gets people hurt." After the meal, Claire was shown to the loft room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the desert. She could see riders in the distance, moving along the ridge like ants on a log. "Miss Ruth stood at the top of the ladder. "I brought you water for washing." "Thank you." Claire accepted the pitcher gratefully. Ruth lingered. "Is it true you told Mr. Briggs you wouldn't marry him?" "Yes." "Weren't you scared?" Claire considered the question seriously. "Yes, but being scared doesn't mean you do what's wrong just because it's easier." Ruth nodded solemnly. "Papa says courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing right anyway." "Your papa's a wise man." After the girl left, Claire unpacked her few belongings. The forged document she hid beneath the mattress, not creative, but it would do for now. From the window, she could see the sun starting its descent toward the western mountains, somewhere out there. Kolar was probably with his sister, warning her about the storm that was coming. Because a storm was coming. Claire could feel it in the way Standish had looked at her, in Murphy's calculating eyes, in the tension that ran through the town like a hidden river. Luther Briggs wasn't the kind of man to let a slight go unanswered, and by refusing him, by running, she'd done more than slight him. She'd challenged his authority, his vision of how the world should work. A knock at the door made her turn. Sarah stood there with an armload of fabric. "Thought you might like something fresh to wear," she said. "These were mine before the children came. They should fit well enough." "I couldn't." "You can and you will," Sarah said firmly. "Tomorrow's Sunday. Josiah holds services in the smithy for those who care to come. It would be good for folks to see you there, looking respectable. Some of them are already talking, wondering what kind of woman travels with an Indian man." "He saved my life," Claire said. "I'm sure he did. Kolar Nez is a good man, whatever folks say, but that won't stop the talk." Sarah set the clothes on the bed. "This is a hard place. Miss O'Hara, it makes hard people, but it also makes strong ones, if you let it." After Sarah left, Claire tried on one of the dresses. It fit well enough. Simple calico that would stand up to desert living. She stood at the window again, watching the sun paint the mountains red and gold. Tomorrow she'd start teaching. Tomorrow she'd begin building a life here, temporary though it might be. But tonight, she pulled out paper and pen and began to write. Not a letter. She had no one to send it to who wouldn't betray her location to Luther. Instead, she wrote down everything she remembered about the forged document, about Standish's reaction to her, about the fear in Murphy's eyes. Evidence, pieces of a puzzle she was only beginning to see. The coyotes started their evening song as she wrote, and Claire found herself touching the blue cloth still tied around her wrist. Somewhere under the same stars. Kolar was probably listening to the same wild music. The thought was oddly comforting. She'd come to Coyote Bend looking for work, for escape, for answers. What she'd found was a town balanced on a knife's edge, where the color of your skin determined which laws applied to you, where the railroad's promise of progress came with a price in blood and broken promises. But she'd also found unexpected kindness from a family who had every reason to be suspicious, and unexpected protection from a man who owed her nothing. It wasn't the life she'd planned. But then again, very little in her life had gone according to plan lately. Claire blew out the candle and settled into bed, listening to the night sounds of the town, a dog barking, distant laughter from the saloon, the endless whisper of wind across sand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight, she was safe, she was free, and she had work to do. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The smell hit Claire first, smoke thick with burning grain and something else, something chemical that made her eyes water. She jolted awake to find Sarah shaking her shoulder, the woman's face painted orange by the glow from the window. Fire the Navajo storehouse. Claire scrambled from bed, pulling a shawl over her nightgown as she followed Sarah down the ladder. Outside, half the town seemed to be running toward the blaze. The storage building where the local Navajo families kept their winter supplies was fully engulfed, flames leaping into the star-filled sky like desperate prayers. "Where's Josiah?" Claire asked, coughing as the wind shifted, bringing smoke thick as wool. "Already there with buckets," Sarah pointed through the chaos. "Watch the children." But Claire couldn't stand idle. She grabbed Ruth and Samuel's hands. "Stay with Mrs. Chang," she ordered, pushing them toward the laundry where the Chinese woman stood with her own children, then ran toward the fire. The scene was chaos. Men formed bucket lines from the nearest well, but it was like trying to stop a river with teacups. Women pulled what supplies they could from nearby buildings. And through it all, Claire heard the ugly whispers. "Told you they'd do something like this. Savages can't stand to see white folks prosper. Probably insurance fraud. If they even know what insurance is." The speaker was a man she'd seen lounging outside the saloon, one of those who seemed to have no job but always had money for whiskey. Claire rounded on him. "Can't you see they're the ones losing everything?" she snapped. "Why would they burn their own food?" The man sneered. "Maybe to blame us. Get sympathy. These redskins are craftier than—" A figure burst from the burning building, and Claire's heart stopped. Kolar, carrying a child whose clothes smoldered, his own shirt half burned away. He laid the boy gently on the ground, and Claire saw it was Thomas, the youngest son of the Begay family. "Water!" Kolar shouted. "Clean water for his burns." Claire ran to the coal house, grabbing the pitcher from her room and the clean sheets Sarah had given her. When she returned, Kolar was kneeling beside the boy, speaking soft words in Navajo while the child's mother wept. "Let me," Claire said, dropping beside them. Her mother had taught her about burns before the fever took her. "We need to cool the skin, but gently." Together they worked, Claire tearing the sheets into strips while Kolar held the terrified child. She could see the burns on Kolar's hands and arms, but he gave no sign of pain, focused entirely on keeping Thomas calm. "The whole harvest," someone was saying. 6 families' worth of corn and beans. Gone. "And right before winter," another voice added. "Convenient timing." Deputy Standish appeared like a bad penny, his shirt pristine despite the chaos. "Everybody step back," he ordered. "This is a crime scene now." Crime scene. Josiah straightened from the bucket line, soot streaking his face. "This is a tragedy, not a crime." "Arson's a crime," Standish said. "And I aim to find who's responsible," his pale eyes fixed on Kolar. "You were here mighty quick." "I saw the flames from the ridge," Kolar said without looking up from Thomas. "I rode as fast as I could." "That's so, and what were you doing out on the ridge at night?" "Looking for my horses. They broke fence earlier." "Convenient." Standish hooked his thumbs in his gun belt. "Find them." "Does it matter?" Kolar's voice was controlled, but Claire heard the edge beneath. "There's a child hurt here. There's going to be more than hurt if we don't get to the bottom of this." Standish raised his voice so the gathering crowd could hear. "I want everyone who doesn't live in town proper gone by sunrise. That includes all Indians, Mexicans without papers, and anyone else who can't prove legitimate business." "You can't do that," Claire said, standing. "These people just lost everything. Where are they supposed to go?" Standish's smile was cold. "Not my problem. Miss O'Hara. But I'd be careful about which side you're taking here. Might give folks the wrong idea about you." "The only wrong idea," Josiah said, stepping forward, "is thinking you have the authority to exile people without cause." "I've got all the cause I need." Standish gestured at the dying flames. "Destruction of property, suspicion of arson, public safety." He looked around at the crowd, many of whom were nodding. Good folks of Coyote Bend deserve to sleep sound without worrying about getting burned in their beds. Claire saw the trap closing. The fire had given Standish exactly what he needed, fear he could shape into law. Law he could use as a weapon. But as she helped Kolar bind his burned hands with wet cloth, she noticed something that made her stomach drop. Boot prints in the ash near the building's base. Large boots with a distinctive worn heel, moving away from the structure. She'd seen that same wear pattern earlier, in Murphy's store, when one of Briggs' men had come in for tobacco. "Kolar," she whispered, "look at the tracks." His dark eyes followed her gesture, and she saw understanding dawn. But before either could speak, Atsa appeared through the smoke like a ghost made of determination. Kolar's sister was smaller than Claire had expected, but she moved with the same fluid grace, and her eyes held the same fierce intelligence. "Brother," she said in accented English, then switched to rapid Navajo. Kolar's expression darkened with each word. "What is it?" Claire asked. "The fire started in 3 places." Kolar translated. "My sister found torch remnants, pine pitch and kerosene. No Navajo uses such things." "Then we need to tell," Claire began, but Kolar's look stopped her. "Tell who the deputy who wants us gone, the townspeople who already believe we're guilty." He shook his head. "Truth doesn't matter when people want to believe lies." But Claire O'Hara hadn't come this far to give up. "Mr. Cole," she called. "Might I borrow a lantern?" 20 minutes later, she was back with Josiah, having traced the boot prints to a spot behind the saloon where someone had tried to burn the remnants of a torch. The smell of kerosene was still strong, and in the dirt, clear as day, was a torn piece of paper with part of a railroad company's seal. "This proves it," she said. "Briggs' men did this." "Proves it to us, maybe," Josiah said grimly. "But Standish won't care. He's in Briggs's pocket deep as a tick." They returned to find the crowd growing uglier. Someone had brought out a rope, and the talk had turned from exile to something worse. Kolar stood protecting the Begay family, but he had no gun, no weapon but his presence and the knife at his belt. "String him up," someone shouted. "Make an example." "Now hold on." Mayor Murphy appeared, looking uncomfortable. "We're not a lynch mob. We have law here. Law that protects them over us," another voice called. Claire pushed through the crowd to Standish. "I found evidence," she said loudly enough for all to hear. "Boot prints leading away from the fire, torch remnants that prove—" "Prove what?" Standish cut her off. "That you're so sweet on this buck that you'll say anything?" He raised his voice. "Folks, Miss O'Hara here's been through a trial. Turned down a good man's proposal, ran off alone. Not surprising she's confused about where her loyalties should lie." The insult burned, but Claire held her ground. "My loyalties lie with the truth." "Truth is," Standish continued, "we've got burned property and Indians on the scene. That's enough for any court." He drew his pistol. "Kolar Nez, you're under arrest for arson and endangering a child." "No!" Atsa stepped between them, and Claire saw she held a weaver's knife, small but sharp. "Atsa, don't," Kolar said quietly. "Put it down." "They'll hang you," his sister said in English, wanting everyone to understand. "They'll murder you for their own crime." "Maybe, maybe not. But if you fight, they'll kill us both, and then who protects the others?" The standoff stretched taut as sinew. Claire found herself moving to stand beside Atsa, and then Sarah was there too, and Donna Marta, and even Mrs. Chang with her limited English but unlimited courage. "You'll have to arrest all of us," Claire said. Standish's face darkened. "Don't test me, woman." That's when they heard it, hoofbeats like thunder, and over the ridge came riders. Not Briggs' men, but soldiers from Fort Wingate. At their head rode a captain Claire recognized from her father's dealings, James Morrison, a fair man by frontier standards. "What's all this, then?" Morrison swung down from his horse, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. "Deputy Standish, why are you pointing a weapon at unarmed women?" "Military's got no jurisdiction here," Standish blustered. "We do when federal property's involved," Morrison said mildly. "And funny thing, that burned building was on land still technically owned by the government, pending final survey. That makes this our business." Claire felt the crowd's mood shift like wind changing direction. Federal involvement meant real investigation, real consequences. Standish holstered his weapon reluctantly. "I want depositions from everyone." Morrison continued. "And I mean everyone. My men will maintain order until we sort this out." He looked at Kolar. You hurt. I'll heal, Kolar said. See that you do. I'll want your statement first thing. Morrison's gaze swept the crowd. Rest of you, go home. Show's over. And if I hear about any vigilante nonsense, you'll answer to me personally. The crowd dispersed slowly, muttering. Standish shot Claire a look that promised retribution, but he too faded into the night. Only then did Kolar sway on his feet, the pain he'd been hiding finally showing. Stubborn fool, Atsa muttered, catching his arm. Come, I have salve for burns. I'll help, Claire said. They made their way to Josiah's stable, where lantern light threw long shadows on the walls, while Atsa mixed herbs into a paste that smelled of sage and something medicinal. Claire helped Kolar remove what was left of his shirt. The burns were worse than she'd thought. Angry red welts across his arms and back. This will hurt, Atsa warned. Everything hurts, Kolar said philosophically. Pain just means you're still alive to feel it. As the women worked, Claire found herself studying his scars, not just from tonight, but older ones. A bullet wound on his shoulder, knife marks on his ribs, the history of violence written on skin. The child, Thomas, she said, will he? He'll live, maybe scarred, but alive. Kolar hissed as Atsa applied salve to a particularly bad burn. His family lost everything, though. 6 months of food, gone. We'll help, Claire said firmly. The church will take up a collection, and... No, Kolar's voice was flat. They won't take charity from whites. Pride is all they have left. Then it won't be charity. It'll be trade. I need to learn Navajo if I'm really going to teach here. They can teach me in exchange for supplies. Kolar turned to look at her, something unreadable in his dark eyes. You're staying after tonight. Where else would I go? Claire began binding his arms with clean cloth. Besides, someone needs to find out who really started that fire. We know who, Atsa said bitterly. Briggs' dogs, making excuse to drive us out. Knowing and proving are different things. Claire said, but I'm good at puzzles. My father always said I could find pattern in chaos. This isn't a game, Kolar warned. Standish wants you gone almost as much as he wants us gone. You're in danger. I've been in danger since I refused Luther Briggs, Claire replied. At least here I'm in danger for a good cause. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the horses shifting in their stalls and the distant noise from the saloon. Finally, Kolar spoke. That first day, at the stage station, you asked why I'd help you. I remember I said I knew what it was to stand against them, but that wasn't all. He paused, seeming to struggle with words. My wife died 3 winters ago. Fever took her and our son. I blamed myself I was away, guiding for the army, earning money we needed. When I came back, they were gone. Claire's hand stilled on the bandages. After that, I stopped caring about much, did what I had to for Atsa, for the clan, but inside, he shrugged, then winced at the movement. Then I saw you at that station, alone, afraid, but standing straight, ready to fight even though you couldn't win. It reminded me that courage isn't about winning. It's about standing. I wasn't brave, Claire said softly. I was terrified. Same thing, maybe. He caught her hand as she reached for another bandage. Be careful. Claire O'Hara, this fight's just beginning. The sound of her given name in his accent did something to her insides. But before she could examine the feeling, Josiah appeared in the doorway. Captain Morrison wants to see you. He told Kolar, and Miss Claire, Sarah's got the children settled, but Ruth's asking for you. She's scared. Claire squeezed Kolar's hand once before letting go. I'll find out who did this, she promised. Evidence doesn't lie, even when people do. As she left the stable, she heard Atsa speaking quietly to her brother in Navajo. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was universal. Be careful. Stay safe. Don't trust them. But trust, Claire was learning, was like water in the desert, rare, precious, and worth fighting for. She touched the blue cloth still wrapped around her wrist and went to comfort a frightened child, carrying with her the smell of smoke and sage, and the memory of scarred hands gentle despite their pain. The war for Coyote Bend had begun with fire. Claire intended to fight it with truth. The sandstorm hit just after they'd passed Devil's Backbone, a wall of red dust that turned day into twilight. Claire pulled her shawl over her face, squinting through the assault of grit and wind as their small party sought shelter. They'd left Coyote Bend 3 days ago, Claire, Kolar, and Atsa heading for Fort Wingate, where Captain Morrison waited to take Claire's full testimony about the fire and the forged documents. "There!" Kolar pointed through the storm to a narrow canyon cutting into the mesa. His voice was nearly lost in the howling wind. "The old shepherd's cave." They fought their way into the shelter, horses protesting, sand finding every gap in their clothing. The cave was deeper than it appeared, worn smooth by centuries of wind and water. As they moved further in, the storm's roar faded to a distant moan. "We'll wait it out here," Kolar said, already working to calm the horses. His movements were still stiff from his burns, though he'd never admit it. Atsa unpacked their supplies with practiced efficiency, while Claire helped secure the animals. In the cave's dim light, filtered through the storm, everything took on an otherworldly quality. They were isolated here, cut off from the world by walls of wind and sand. "How long will it last?" Claire asked, shaking dust from her hair. "Hours, maybe till morning." Atsa replied, "These late-season storms, they take their time." Kolar built a small fire near the cave mouth, where the smoke could escape, but the wind couldn't reach. The warmth was welcome. Desert nights were cold, and the storm had brought an unseasonable chill. They settled around the fire, sharing water and dried meat. The enforced intimacy of the cave made Claire acutely aware of Kolar's presence, the way firelight caught in his dark eyes, the careful way he moved to spare his healing burns. "Tell me about your mother," Claire said to Atsa, seeking safer ground. "Kolar mentioned she passed when you were young." Atsa's face softened. "She was a weaver, like me, but better. Her blankets told stories you could read them like books if you knew how." She pulled out the project she always carried, fingers moving automatically over the wool. "She taught me that every thread matters. Pull one wrong, the whole pattern fails." "Like life," Claire murmured. "Like many things." Atsa glanced between Claire and her brother with an expression that might have been amusement. "She would have liked you. She appreciated women who spoke their minds." "Even white women?" Claire asked, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was—" "Honest," Kolar interrupted. "My mother valued honesty above politeness." His voice carried a hint of warmth. "She used to say that truth was like water, it always finds its level." The fire crackled, and outside the storm continued its assault. Claire found herself studying Kolar's profile in the flickering light. These past weeks in Coyote Bend, they'd developed a careful friendship. He'd taken to stopping by after her lessons, ostensibly to check on the families affected by the fire, but often lingering to discuss books with the children or help Josiah with metalwork that required a steady hand. "You're staring," Atsa observed with a smile. Claire flushed. "I was thinking." "Dangerous habit," Kolar said dryly. "Especially for a woman who thinks she can take on Luther Briggs." "Someone has to," Claire said. "That fire wasn't random. The way Standish immediately blamed your people. The convenient timing. Briggs wants something." "He wants everything," Atsa said bitterly. "The land, the water rights, the old trading routes. The railroad needs them to connect their lines." "But there's more." Claire pulled out the papers she'd been guarding, not just the forged document, but notes she'd compiled. "I've been tracking the land sales around Coyote Bend. There's a pattern. Every family that sold recently had some kind of trouble first. Fires, stolen livestock, wells going dry overnight." Kolar leaned forward to look, careful not to touch her as he studied the papers. That careful distance hurt more than it should have. You see, Claire pointed to her makeshift map. It's forming a corridor right through traditional Navajo grazing lands to the copper deposits in the Magdalena Mountains. The sacred mountains, Atsa breathed. They wouldn't dare. They would and they will, Kolar said grimly. Unless we stop them. The storm howled louder, and the fire flickered. In the dancing shadows, Claire felt the weight of what they were attempting. 3 people against the machinery of progress, armed with nothing but truth and determination. I should check the horses, Kolar said, rising. I'll help, Claire offered, but he waved her back. Rest, tomorrow's ride will be hard. After he disappeared into the cave's depths, Atsa studied Claire with knowing eyes. He cares for you. We're friends, Claire said carefully. My brother doesn't make friends easily. Not anymore. Atsa's fingers never stopped their weaving. He thinks he's protecting you by keeping distance. From what? From himself, from what being with him would mean for you. Atsa's voice was gentle but frank. A white woman who takes up with a Navajo man becomes something else in the eyes of your people. No longer respectable, no longer safe. Claire thought of her reputation, already tattered from refusing Briggs. I've never been particularly respectable. But you've been safe, relatively. Atsa tied off a thread. That would end. They sat in silence, listening to the storm and the echo of Kolar's movements with the horses. Finally, Claire spoke. I've spent my whole life being what others expected. Good daughter, potential good wife, keeper of proprieties. And where did it lead to a father in debt and a man who thinks he can own me? She met Atsa's gaze. I'm tired of being safe. Atsa smiled. As I said, my mother would have liked you. When Kolar returned, he brought news. The storm's weakening. We can move at first light. He settled back by the fire, and Claire noticed he sat slightly closer than before. I've been thinking about what happens at Fort Wingate, he said. Morrison's fair, but he's still Army. He'll need more than testimony. We have the documents. Papers can be disputed. We need a witness, someone who'll speak against Briggs. Who would dare? Atsa asked. Claire remembered something. Doña Marta, that first day. She mentioned Briggs had been asking about me before I arrived. She knows something. She won't testify, Kolar said. She has grandchildren to protect. Then we need another way. Claire stared into the fire, mind racing. What about the surveyor? Someone's been mapping those routes for the railroad. Harrison, Kolar supplied. Thomas Harrison, but he's Briggs's man through and through. Every man has a price. Claire said, we just need to find his... The conversation continued, planning and plotting. But underneath ran an awareness that seemed to pulse with the firelight. When their hands accidentally touched reaching for the water, neither pulled away immediately. When the cold deepened and they arranged their bedrolls, Atsa conspicuously placed hers on the far side of the fire, leaving Claire and Kolar side by side. For warmth, Atsa said innocently. The storm brings cold. They lay in the darkness. The fire burned low, the storm fading to whispers. Claire was acutely aware of every breath, every slight movement. Then Kolar spoke, so quietly she almost missed it. That day in the stable, when you were tending my burns, you didn't flinch. Why would I? Most white women would, from the scars, if nothing else. Claire turned on her side to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. I'm not most women. No, he agreed. You're not. The silence stretched, filled with possibilities. Then Claire felt his hand find hers in the darkness, calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. This is dangerous, he said. Everything worth doing is, she replied. He was quiet so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, since my wife died, I haven't wanted, He struggled for words. You make me want things I thought were buried with her. Claire squeezed his hand. Is that wrong? My people believe the dead want us to live, to love again, but knowing and doing. He turned toward her, and now she could see his eyes reflecting the ember's glow. You don't understand what you'd be giving up. Your own people would turn from you, call you things that would make you wish for simple insults. And what would your people call you? She asked. Some would understand. Others, he smiled sadly. But I stopped living for others' approval long ago. They moved at the same time, drawn like magnets. The kiss was gentle, almost hesitant, as if they were both afraid the other might vanish. Claire tasted smoke and something wild, felt the careful restraint in the way he held her. When they parted, she was breathless. I've been told what I should want my whole life, she whispered. This is the first time I've chosen for myself. He traced her face with one finger, learning her by touch in the darkness. You humble me, he said simply. They came together again, less hesitant now, in the cave's shelter, with the storm dying outside and Atsa's deliberately steady breathing across the fire. They found each other. Not in the way the gossips of Coyote Bend would imagine Kolar was too honorable and Claire too aware of consequences for that, but in the meeting of hands and lips, in whispered words mixing English and Navajo, in the simple act of choosing each other despite everything that stood between them. Claire, he said her name like a prayer. When this is over, when Briggs is stopped. Shh, she placed a finger on his lips. No promises tonight, just this. He kissed her finger, then her palm, then pulled her close against him. They lay entwined, fully clothed but more intimate than Claire had ever been with anyone. She felt his heart beating against her chest, felt the careful way he held her as if she were precious but not fragile. You don't want a virgin like me, she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could stop them. All her doubts suddenly surfacing. What did she know of love? Of passion? She was untouched in body, yes, but sometimes she felt untouched in soul too, as if real life had passed her by while she played at being proper. Kolar pulled back to look at her, his expression serious in the dying firelight. Then that rare smile crossed his features, transforming his face. You're all I want, he said simply, exactly as you are. Tears stung her eyes. She buried her face against his neck, breathing in the scent of sage and smoke and man. He held her while she cried for her father, for the home she'd lost, for the woman she was becoming in this hard place. When the tears passed, she felt cleansed, empty of old griefs and ready to be filled with new purpose. She lifted her head to find him watching her with such tenderness it took her breath. No more tears, he said, wiping her cheeks with his thumb. No more tears, she agreed. They settled back together, and despite the hard ground and the cold seeping in as the fire died, Claire felt perfectly at peace. Tomorrow would bring its challenges. Fort Wingate, testimony, the fight against Briggs all waited with the dawn. But tonight, in a cave carved by ancient waters, guarded by stone and storm, she'd found something worth any risk. Not just love, though she thought that's what this feeling might be, but the courage to reach for it despite all the reasons she shouldn't. Atsa's voice drifted across the dying fire, amused and approving. About time. Kolar chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest where Claire rested her head. Go to sleep, sister. I am asleep, Atsa replied. Deeply asleep and hearing nothing. Claire smiled against Kolar's shirt. Outside, the last of the storm whispered away, leaving stars visible through the cave mouth. Tomorrow's journey would be hard, dangerous even, but tonight, wrapped in warmth and acceptance, she was exactly where she belonged. The blue cloth around her wrist had loosened in their embrace. Kolar retied it with careful fingers, then kissed her forehead. Sleep, he murmured. I'll keep watch. We'll take turns, she said, already drowsing. Stubborn woman. Stubborn man. He laughed softly, and it was the last thing she heard before sleep claimed her. In the morning, they would rise and face the world with all its prejudices and dangers, but they would face it together, and that made all the difference. The fire burned to embers, the stars wheeled overhead, and in a shepherd's cave in the desert, two hearts began to heal. The courthouse at Fort Wingate stood like a sun-bleached bone against the morning sky. Claire smoothed her best dress, the blue calico Sarah had given her, and tried to calm her racing heart. Through the window, she could see the gallery filling with townspeople, soldiers, and a contingent of Navajo families who'd made the journey to witness. "Remember," Captain Morrison said, reviewing his notes one final time. "Stick to the facts. Judge Thornton is fair, but he's a stickler for evidence." Claire nodded, clutching the folder of documents she'd compiled. Across the room, Kolar stood with rigid dignity, his traditional vest worn over a clean white shirt. They'd been careful since arriving at the fort, maintaining proper distance, but she could feel his presence like a lodestone. "All rise," the bailiff's voice cracked with youth. "The territorial court is now in session. Judge Elijah Thornton presiding." Thornton was a small man with intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles. He took his seat and surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious displeasure. "This is a hearing, not a circus. Anyone who disrupts proceedings will be removed." His gaze lingered on the section where Briggs' hired men lounged. "That means you, Mr. Pike." Pike, the man Kolar had disarmed at the way station, smiled insolently, but said nothing. "Captain Morrison, present your case." Morrison stood. "Your Honor, we're investigating multiple instances of fraud, intimidation, and arson connected to land acquisitions in the Coyote Bend area. Miss Claire O'Hara has evidence." The door burst open. Deputy Standish strode in, spurs ringing on the wooden floor. Behind him marched 6 men wearing badges Claire didn't recognize. "Your Honor," Standish announced, "I'm placing Kolar Nez under arrest for sedition and armed insurrection against lawful authority." The courtroom erupted. Judge Thornton hammered his gavel repeatedly. "Order Deputy Standish. On whose authority?" "Governor's Special Commission." Standish produced a paper with an official seal. "Given recent Indian troubles up north, we've been granted emergency powers to detain any hostile elements." "This is outrageous," Morrison stood. "Kolar Nez has committed no crime." "He threatened a peace officer," Standish interrupted. "Multiple witnesses saw him draw a weapon on me last month." "After you illegally confiscated his property," Claire couldn't stay silent. "Your Honor, this is nothing but intimidation." "Miss O'Hara," Judge Thornton's voice was sharp, "you'll have your turn to speak." He studied the governor's order, frowning. "This appears to be an order. Deputy, but highly irregular. Mr. Nez, do you have counsel?" "I speak for myself," Kolar said, his voice carrying despite the chaos. "I have drawn no weapon on any man except in defense of innocent life." "He's lying," Pike jumped up. "I saw him threaten the deputy just last week." "Interesting," Judge Thornton observed. "That you're so eager to testify. Mr. Pike, perhaps you'd like to do so under oath." Pike's enthusiasm dimmed visibly. "Your Honor." A new voice spoke from the gallery. Josiah Cole stood, hat in hand. "I'd like to testify to this man's character, if the court permits." "And I," Doña Marta struggled to her feet. "I have something to say about Deputy Standish and his law." More voices rose: the Mexican carpenter whose son Kolar had taught to track, the Chinese laundress whose husband Kolar had helped dig a new well. Even young Thomas Begay, still bandaged from the fire, stood with his mother. "Enough." Standish's hand moved to his gun. "Your Honor, we don't have time for this." Deputy Judge Thornton's voice could have cut glass. "You will not threaten this court. Sergeant McAllister." A grizzled army sergeant stepped forward. "Sir." "Please escort Deputy Standish and his men to seats in the gallery. They can wait their turn like everyone else." You can't, Standish began. I can and I will. This is a federal court on federal land. Your emergency powers, whatever they may be, do not supersede my authority here. The judge turned to Claire. Miss O'Hara, please present your evidence. Claire's hands trembled as she stood. This was it, their chance. She opened her folder and began. Your Honor, I have here a land deed supposedly signed by my father and witnessed by Deputy Standish. However, the witness signature is forged. She handed the document to the bailiff. If you compare it to this Deputy Standish's actual signature on an arrest warrant from last month, you'll see the differences. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the judge examined both documents with a magnifying glass. Furthermore, Claire continued, gaining confidence, I have compiled a pattern of land transfers in the Coyote Bend area. In each case, the sellers experienced catastrophic losses shortly before selling fires, poisoned wells, stolen livestock, and in each case, the land was purchased by shell companies that all trace back to Luther Briggs. Objection. A man in an expensive suit rose from Briggs's section. My client isn't on trial here. No one's on trial yet, Judge Thornton said dryly. Continue, Miss O'Hara. Claire pulled out her map. The purchased lands form a corridor directly through traditional Navajo grazing grounds to the copper deposits in the Magdalena Mountains. The railroad needs this route, and they're using Deputy Standish to clear the way. Lies. Standish shot to his feet despite the sergeant's restraining hand. Your Honor, this woman is obviously involved with the savage. Of course she'd say anything to protect him. Involved? Claire's temper flared. Yes, I'm involved with anyone who stands against corruption and theft. Miss O'Hara, the judge warned. I'm sorry, Your Honor, but... A commotion outside interrupted her. Through the window, she saw dust rising. Riders, many of them. The door opened again, and Claire's heart sank. Luther Briggs himself entered, flanked by 4 armed men. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold way, like a statue carved from ambition. Your Honor, Briggs said smoothly, removing his hat. I apologize for the interruption. I've just received word of an Indian uprising near Sheep Springs. 3 settlers dead. I'm afraid I need Deputy Standish and his men immediately. How convenient, Morrison muttered. Judge Thornton's eyes narrowed. Mr. Briggs, your timing is suspicious to say the least. Justice delayed is justice denied, Briggs replied. Surely you wouldn't keep peace officers from responding to an emergency. His gaze found Claire. Hello, Claire. You're looking well, considering your recent adventures. Mr. Briggs, she said coldly. That's all after everything between us. His smile was predatory. Your father sends his regards. By the way, he's quite worried about you. Amazing how quickly debts can accumulate when the principal holder calls them in. The threat was clear. Submit or watch her father lose everything. Your Honor. Kolar spoke for the first time in many minutes. If there truly is trouble at Sheep Springs, let me go. I know the families there. If there's been violence, I can help find the truth. Absolutely not, Standish snapped. You'd warn them. Help them escape. Deputy. Judge Thornton interrupted. You seem very certain of Mr. Nez's guilt in matters that haven't even been investigated yet. The tension in the room was suffocating. Claire saw hands inching toward weapons, saw the fear and anger in the gallery. One spark would set off a massacre. Then young Thomas Begay did something extraordinary. He walked forward, still limping from his burns, and stood before the judge's bench. Your Honor, he said in careful English, I want to tell about the fire. His mother gasped, tried to pull him back, but he stood firm. I couldn't sleep that night. I saw men near our storehouse. White men. They had torches. He pointed a small finger at Pike. That one. He was laughing when he threw the fire. The courtroom exploded. Pike lunged for the boy, but Kolar was faster. putting himself between them. Standish went for his gun, but Sergeant McAllister had been expecting it, disarming him with practiced efficiency. "Order," Judge Thornton bellowed. "Sergeant, arrest Mr. Pike on suspicion of arson, Deputy Standish. You're under arrest for conspiracy and fraud." "You can't do this." Briggs' composure finally cracked. "I own this territory. I own the future. You own nothing here," the judge said icily. "Bailiff, clear the court of all armed men except military personnel. We're going to sort this out properly." The next few minutes were chaos. Briggs' men tried to fight, but the soldiers were ready. Claire found herself pressed against the wall as bodies surged past. Through it all, she kept her eyes on Kolar, who stood protecting the Begay family like a mountain against the storm. When order was finally restored, half of Briggs's men were in shackles. Briggs himself sat rigid with fury, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. "Now then," Judge Thornton said, adjusting his spectacles, "let's continue with actual evidence. Mrs. Begay, does your son have more to tell us?" What followed was devastating. Thomas identified 3 of the men who'd burned the storehouse. Doña Marta, emboldened, testified about bribes Standish had taken. The Mexican carpenter produced a ledger he'd stolen from Standish's office, showing payments from Briggs for special services. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. Harrison, the surveyor, stood up in the gallery. "I can't do this anymore," he said, his face gray. "Judge, I've got maps, real ones and fake ones. Mr. Briggs had me draw up false boundaries, moving water sources, hiding the best grazing land." He pulled rolled papers from his coat. "It's all here, every lie, every theft." "You're dead," Briggs snarled. But the soldiers were already moving to protect the surveyor. Judge Thornton studied the maps while the court held its breath. Finally, he looked up. "Mr. Briggs, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Deputy Standish, the charges against you include corruption, assault, and civil rights violations. Mr. Pike, arson and attempted murder of a child." "Your Honor." Morrison stepped forward. "Given the federal implications and the involvement of the railroad, I request these prisoners be transferred to military custody." "Granted. And Mr. Nez?" The judge looked at Kolar. "You're free to go, with the court's apologies for your treatment." Kolar inclined his head slightly. "Justice speaks for itself." As the soldiers led the prisoners out, Briggs stopped near Claire. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Your father's debts are fraudulent." Judge Thornton interrupted. "Any contracts bearing forged witnesses are null and void. Miss O'Hara, you'll want to have your father consult a lawyer about recovering damages." Briggs's face went white as he was dragged away. Claire felt years of fear lift from her shoulders. The courtroom slowly emptied, people talking excitedly about what they'd witnessed. Claire found herself standing with Kolar in a pocket of sudden quiet. "You did it," he said softly. "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." His hand found hers, just for a moment, hidden by their bodies from curious eyes. "What now?" Before she could answer, Morrison approached. "Miss O'Hara, Mr. Nez, a word." He led them to a corner. "This isn't over. Briggs has friends in high places. There'll be an appeal, political pressure. You've won the battle, but the war continues." "Then we keep fighting," Claire said. Morrison smiled. "I hoped you'd say that. The fort commander wants to offer you a position. Miss O'Hara, official liaison between the Army and the local communities. The pay's not much, but it comes with federal protection." And Kolar, "Mr. Nez's knowledge of the territory is invaluable. We could use a scout who actually wants peace between peoples." Claire and Kolar exchanged glances. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. "We'll consider it," Kolar said. As they left the courthouse, Atsa waited with the horses. Her face broke into a rare full smile when she saw them. "I heard the shouting from here. Good news." "Justice," Kolar said simply. "For now." They rode back toward Coyote Bend as the sun reached its zenith. The landscape looked different somehow, still harsh, still unforgiving, but no longer hopeless. At the top of a rise, they paused to rest the horses. "Look," Atsa pointed to the valley below. A group of riders was leaving Coyote Bend, heading east, even from this distance. Claire recognized some of Briggs' remaining men, fleeing before the law could catch up. "Rats abandoning the ship," she murmured. "Good riddance," Atsa said. "Maybe now we can build something better." They sat in companionable silence, watching the dust of departure. Claire thought about her father, about the letter she'd write telling him the debts were void, about the children waiting for their lessons, about the future stretching before them, uncertain but finally their own to shape. "There'll be more Briggs," Kolar said quietly. "Other men who see our land as their opportunity. Then there'll need to be more of us." Claire replied, "People willing to stand together." He smiled, that rare, transformative expression. "A teacher who shoots and a Navajo who reads law. We make an unlikely army." "The best kind," she said. As they rode down toward home, and when had Coyote Bend become home, Claire touched the blue cloth at her wrist. The pattern Atsa had woven seemed to catch the light, telling its own story of mountains and stars, of paths crossing in unlikely ways. Justice had spoken today. In a small courtroom at the edge of the world, tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for now, it was enough to ride through the desert with people she trusted, toward a place where she belonged. The war wasn't over, but today they'd proven it could be won. The rain came suddenly, transforming the dry creek bed into a roaring monster. Claire watched in horror as the brown water rose with impossible speed, cutting off their route back to Fort Wingate. They'd made camp in what seemed like a safe spot, a fool's mistake in flash flood country. "Higher ground!" Kolar shouted over the water's roar. "Now!" The soldier escort 5 young men under Corporal Williams scrambled for their horses. Williams, barely 20 and green as spring grass, looked to Kolar with panic in his eyes. "The canyon walls," Kolar pointed. "There's a trail." The water struck like a fist. Claire's horse screamed. Legs swept from under it. She kicked free of the stirrups as they went down, the current immediately trying to drag her under. Water filled her mouth, nose, ears brown and gritty and cold as death. Strong hands caught her, hauled her against a solid chest. Kolar had her, was fighting the current with pure will. But the water was winning, pulling them both toward the narrow canyon where the flood would crush them against the rocks. "The rope!" Atsa's voice cut through the chaos. She'd made it to high ground with 2 of the soldiers, was already fashioning a lifeline from their lariats. Kolar caught the rope one-handed, his other arm locked around Claire's waist. The current tried to tear them apart, but he held on with strength born of desperation. Inch by agonizing inch, they were pulled towards safety. They collapsed on the ledge, coughing up muddy water. Claire's hands were bleeding from rocks, her dress torn to rags, but she was alive. Below them, the flood raged on, carrying away their supplies, their evidence, everything. "Williams," Kolar called. "Sound off." Here, the corporal had made it to the opposite bank with 2 men. But Davies and Mitchell, they could see the 2 soldiers clinging to a dead tree in the middle of the torrent. The tree shifted, groaned, started to roll. "No time," Kolar said, already moving. He took the rope from Atsa, tied it around his waist. "Hold this. Whatever happens, hold it." "Kolar, no." Claire grabbed his arm. "It's suicide." He looked at her, and she saw everything in his eyes: love, determination, the quiet acceptance of necessary risk. "Hold the rope," he said softly, then dove. The water took him immediately, but he swam with powerful strokes, using the current instead of fighting it. He reached the tree just as it began to break free. Davies, the younger soldier, was unconscious. Mitchell's face was white with terror. "Take him," Kolar shouted, pushing Davies toward Mitchell. "I'll support. You swim." Together they struck out for shore, Kolar keeping Davies' head above water while Mitchell pulled them forward. The rope went taut. Claire and Atsa and the two soldiers on their ledge pulling with everything they had. They almost made it. Then the tree, finally freed, came spinning down the flood like a battering ram. "Look out!" Claire screamed. Kolar saw it coming, shoved Mitchell and Davies toward shore with the last of his strength. The tree caught him across the back with a sound like thunder. He went under and didn't come up. No, Claire would have jumped in after him, but Atsa held her back with surprising strength. "Wait," Atsa commanded. "Trust him." The rope was still taut, still moving. Then, like a miracle, Kolar's head broke the surface 20 feet downstream. He was hurt, moving sluggishly, but alive and fighting to return. They hauled him in like a landed fish. He collapsed on the ledge, blood seeping through his shirt where the tree had struck. Mitchell and Davies, pulled to safety by the soldiers on the far bank, were shouting their thanks across the water. "Fool," Claire said, cradling his head in her lap. "Brave, noble fool." He smiled weakly. "Soldiers would have done. Same for me." "Would they?" she asked, looking at Williams across the flood. The corporal's face gave the answer before today. Probably not. But now was different. They waited out the flood on their separate ledges, tending wounds and taking stock. Most of their supplies were gone, including the packet of evidence Claire had been carrying to the fort's commander. The original documents were safe in Fort Wingate, but the copies and additional testimony they'd gathered were feeding fish downstream. "We'll have to go back," Claire said as the water finally began to recede. "Collect it all again." "No." Kolar struggled to sit up, wincing. "We go forward. The commander is expecting us. Empty-handed is better than not at all." As the sun set, they were finally able to ford the much-diminished creek. Williams and his men had salvaged what they could: a few waterlogged saddlebags, some hardtack, ammunition that would need careful drying. "Sir," Williams approached Kolar hesitantly. "What you did, saving my men." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong about your people. I'm sorry." Kolar studied the young soldier. "You're not the first to think ill of us. Won't be the last, but you can learn. That's what matters." They made cold camp on high ground, everyone too exhausted for anything but basic needs. Claire redressed Kolar's wounds by firelight, trying not to show how bad they looked. The tree had left a gash across his back that needed stitches they didn't have. "It'll hold until the fort," he said, reading her worry. "I've had worse." "That doesn't comfort me as much as you think it does." Atsa appeared with a handful of plants she'd found. "Chew these," she told her brother. "For the pain." As Kolar dozed fitfully, Claire sat with Atsa, watching the stars appear. The younger woman was working on something thread salvaged from somewhere, her fingers never still. "Teaching me patience," Atsa said, noticing Claire's attention. "When you can't control the big things, control the small ones." "Is that why you're always weaving?" "Partly. Also because if I don't keep my hands busy, I might strangle someone." She smiled to show she was joking. "Mostly. My brother thinks he has to save everyone. He saved those soldiers. And nearly killed himself doing it. Again." Atsa's fingers paused. "He was different. After his wife died. Careful, closed. Like he'd decided feeling things hurt too much." She looked at Claire. "You changed that." "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did. Maybe not at first, but now." Atsa smiled. "I see how you look at each other. Like sunrise after a long night." They were quiet for a while, listening to the men's breathing, the pop of the fire, the distant yip of coyotes. Then Mitchell approached, limping slightly, Miss, I wanted to. That is. The soldier stumbled over his words. I have a sister back home. If something had happened to me today, she'd have been alone. Your man, mister. Nez, he made sure that didn't happen. He's good at that, Claire said softly. Yes, miss, I wanted you to know I'll remember. When we get back, if anyone speaks ill of him or his people, they'll answer to me. After Mitchell returned to his bedroll, Atsa chuckled. One by one, she said. That's how the world changes. One by one. The next morning brought new challenges. Kolar could barely mount his horse, though he tried to hide it. The wound had stiffened overnight, and Claire could see fever starting in his eyes. We need to move fast, she told Williams. He needs a doctor. They pushed hard, stopping only to water the horses. By afternoon, Kolar was swaying in his saddle. Claire rode beside him, ready to catch him if he fell. Talk to me, she urged. Tell me about your childhood, your first horse, anything. He smiled through the pain. Her name was Smoke, gray as morning mist, through me 7 times the first day. Stubborn even then. Had to be. Youngest of 4 boys, had to fight for everything. Where are your brothers now? His face shadowed. Gone. Sickness, war, whiskey. He straightened with effort. Just Atsa and me now. They crested a rise, and there it was, Fort Wingate, walls golden in the late sun. The sentries had seen them coming. The gates were opening, men running out to help. The fort doctor, a competent man named Hartwell, took one look at Kolar and started barking orders. As they carried him to the infirmary, he caught Claire's hand. Stay, he said. Try to stop me. Dr. Hartwell worked with steady hands, cleaning and stitching while Claire held Kolar's hand and Atsa sang softly in Navajo. The fever was setting in properly now, and they all knew the next few hours would be critical. He's strong, Hartwell said when he finished. But infection's always a risk with wounds like this. Captain Morrison arrived as they were settling Kolar into a bed. I heard what happened. The men he saved are singing his praises to anyone who'll listen. Good, Claire said fiercely. Let them sing loud enough for Washington to hear. Morrison smiled. Actually, that's why I'm here. A telegram came while you were gone. The Attorney General is sending a special prosecutor to investigate the land frauds. Your evidence convinced them. His smile faded. But Briggs has powerful friends. He's already out on bail, and there are rumors he's gathering men for some kind of response. Claire looked at Kolar, pale and fevered but still fighting, at Atsa, standing guard like a small fierce hawk, at the soldiers who'd learned today that courage came in all colors. Let him come, she said. We'll be ready. Morrison left them with promises of support and resources. As night fell, Claire and Atsa took turns bathing Kolar's fever and spooning water between his cracked lips, somewhere in the darkest hours. Mitchell appeared with coffee and sandwiches. Thought you might need these, he said awkwardly. Is there anything else? Pray, Atsa said simply. If you know how, pray. Dawn came slowly. Painting the infirmary walls rose and gold. Claire had dozed in her chair, her hand still clasping Kolar's. She woke to find his eyes open, clear for the first time since the fever took hold. Water, he croaked. She nearly spilled it in her haste, laughing and crying at the same time. You're back, you're back. Hard to kill, he managed, like desert weed. Atsa stirred from her blanket on the floor, took one look at her brother, and smiled. I'll tell the doctor, and maybe find some proper food, broth, not army coffee. When they were alone, Kolar lifted his free hand to touch Claire's face. You stayed. I told you I would. She turned her face into his palm. Kolar, when you went into that water, I thought, I can't lose you, not now, not when we've just found each other. Claire, her name was a promise. I'm not going anywhere. Too much work to do. The trial? You mean... That and other things. His thumb traced her cheekbone. When this is over, when Briggs is dealt with, I hope. Yes, she said, not needing to hear the rest. Whatever you're asking, yes. He pulled her down for a kiss, gentle but sure. When they parted, she saw William standing in the doorway, frozen with surprise. The corporal's face went through several expressions before settling on something like resignation mixed with respect. I'll, come back later, he said, retreating hastily. That'll be all over the fort by noon, Claire said. Good, Kolar replied. Let them know. You're mine. I'm yours. Simple as that. Nothing about us is simple. No, he agreed. But the best things never are. Atsa returned with broth and news. Special prosecutor arrives tomorrow, and Corporal Williams is telling everyone how you saved his men. The story grows with each telling. By noon you'll have swum through fire and fought off a dozen water serpents. Just the flood, Kolar said. That was enough. As he ate, gaining strength with each spoonful. Claire thought about the journey ahead. The trial would be brutal. Briggs wouldn't go down without a fight. There would be threats, violence, attempts to silence them. But looking around the small infirmary at Kolar alive and healing, at Atsa standing guard, at the doorway where young soldiers kept peering in to check on the man who'd saved their comrades, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. They'd survived Luther Briggs's worst. They'd survived the desert's attempt to kill them. They'd survived their own fears and the prejudices of others. And in surviving, they'd begun to build something new, not perfect, not easy, but real. The sun climbed higher, flooding the room with light. Somewhere in the fort, she could hear soldiers drilling, horses neighing, the everyday sounds of life going on. Tomorrow would bring the special prosecutor and new battles. But today Kolar was alive. Their evidence was safe. And change was coming to the territory like spring rain after a long drought. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a beginning. Dawn broke over Coyote Bend like spilled blood across sand. Claire stood on the boarding house porch, watching dust devils dance down the empty main street. The town felt different, too quiet, like the earth holding its breath before a storm. They're coming, Doña Marta said behind her, voice heavy with knowing. Briggs and his dogs. The whole town knows. It had been 2 weeks since the hearing at Fort Wingate. 2 weeks of legal maneuvering, of depositions and documentation. The special prosecutor had built an ironclad case, but Briggs's money had bought delays, appeals, and time to plan revenge. How many, Claire asked. 20, maybe 30 riders, coming from the south. Marta crossed herself. You should run. Nina, take your man and go. Claire touched the Colt at her hip. Josiah had insisted she carry it openly now. We're done running. Down the street, she could see others preparing. Murphy boarding up his store windows, the Chang family loading their wagon, but not everyone was fleeing. Josiah emerged from his smithy carrying rifles, Sarah beside him with boxes of ammunition. Kolar appeared from the stable, still moving stiffly from his injuries but steady on his feet. Council meeting, he said simply. Now. They gathered in the saloon an unlikely war council. Claire and Kolar, Josiah and Sarah, Doña Marta, Williams and 3 soldiers who'd stayed behind after escorting them back, even Harrison the surveyor, seeking redemption for his past crimes. Most surprising were the handful of Navajo men who'd ridden in during the night, led by old Hosteen Bigay. My grandson lives because of you, Bigay said to Kolar in accented English. We stand with you. This isn't your fight, Kolar protested. When they come for one, they come for all, Bigay replied. We learned this long ago. Williams spread a map on the bar. If I were Briggs, I'd hit from 2 directions. Main force down Center Street. Second group from the wash to cut off escape. He'll go for the evidence first, Harrison added, guilt making him helpful. The courthouse, without documents, the prosecutors got nothing. Then we make the courthouse a fortress. Josiah said, and pray. Prayer's good, Kolar said. But I prefer preparation. He looked around the room, seeing merchants and soldiers, settlers and natives, all united by necessity. We need shooters on the roofs, barricades at both ends of town. Someone should ride to Fort Wingate. I already sent young Davies at midnight, Williams said, but even riding hard helps 8 hours away. Then we hold for 8 hours, Claire said. The room fell silent, everyone calculating odds. 30 gunmen against their ragtag defenders. It would be a massacre unless... The sheep. Atsa spoke from the doorway. Everyone turned to stare at Kolar's sister, who rarely attended town meetings. Brother, remember the story grandfather told about the canyon defense? Kolar's eyes lit with understanding. The Tsai strategy. It might work. By full daylight, Coyote Bend had transformed. Barricades blocked the streets, overturned wagons, water barrels, furniture dragged from houses. The courthouse stood like an island. Windows sandbagged, defenders positioned with clear fields of fire. But the real surprise waited in the arrow wash behind town where Atsa and the Navajo women had worked through the night. Hundreds of sheep, brought in by cooperative herders who remembered Kolar's family with gratitude. The animals milled nervously in the narrow confines, bleating their confusion. "Are you sure this will work?" Claire asked, checking her rifle for the 10th time. "Stampede worked at Sayi Canyon in my grandfather's time." Kolar said, "Confusion is a weapon too." The waiting was agony. Claire positioned herself on the saloon roof with Williams and 2 soldiers. From here, she could see Kolar at the courthouse, Josiah at the smithy, the Navajo men hidden along the wash. The sun climbed higher, baking the town into a furnace. Then dust on the horizon, riders coming fast, spreading out as they approached. At their head, Luther Briggs rode like a general leading an army, even from a distance. Claire could see the fury in his bearing. "Hold fire," Williams called softly. "Let them commit." Briggs's men swept into town, whooping and firing into the air. They expected fear, flight, easy victory. Instead, they found empty streets and silence. "O'Hara!" Briggs's voice echoed off adobe walls. "Claire O'Hara, come out and face justice for your lies." Claire stayed hidden, rifle trained on Briggs' chest. "Not yet, not yet." "Burn them out," Briggs ordered. "Start with the courthouse." His men dismounted, moving toward the building with torches. That's when Kolar gave the signal, a piercing whistle that cut through the morning air. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Rifle fire from the rooftops dropped 4 men before they knew what hit them. Josiah and the defenders at the courthouse opened up, driving the attackers back. But the real chaos came from behind. Atsa's sheep poured into town like a woolly avalanche, driven by Navajo riders whooping and waving blankets. Hundreds of panicked animals charged down Main Street, scattering horses, knocking down men, turning Briggs' organized assault into pandemonium. "Now!" Williams shouted. Claire fired, her shot taking the hat off a gunman drawing on Kolar. Around her, soldiers picked targets with disciplined precision. Below, Briggs' men tried to reorganize, but the sheep were everywhere bleeding, running, creating a maze of moving bodies. Through it all, Claire kept track of Kolar. He moved through the chaos with deadly grace, never wasting a shot, always where he was needed most. She saw him pull Sarah Cole to safety when attackers reached the smithy, saw him rally the Navajo men when they started to fall back. But Briggs was rallying too. His voice cut through the noise, pulling his scattered men together. They started targeting the defenders systematically, using cover, advancing by groups. "They're organizing," Williams warned. "We can't hold." An explosion rocked the town. Someone had thrown dynamite at the courthouse wall, blowing a hole in their defenses. Smoke billowed. and through it came Briggs himself, pistol in each hand, face twisted with rage. "Kolar," Claire screamed a warning, but her voice was lost in gunfire. She saw it happen as if in slow motion. Briggs raising his guns, Kolar turning, too late, the flash of muzzles, and Standish stepping out of nowhere, shooting Briggs in the back. The former deputy, stood over Briggs's body, smoking gun in hand. "That's for leaving me to hang alone," he spat. The battle turned in that instant. Seeing their leader fall, Briggs' men wavered. Some threw down weapons. Others ran for their horses. The defenders pressed their advantage, driving them out with concentrated fire. But victory came at a cost. Claire scrambled down from the roof, pushing through sheep and smoke to reach the courthouse. She found Kolar kneeling beside a still form, Hostine Bigay, blood spreading beneath him. "He pushed me aside," Kolar said, voice hollow. "Took the bullet meant for me." The old man's eyes were still bright, though his breath came in gasps. He gripped Kolar's hand, speaking in Navajo. Claire didn't need translation to understand last words. Blessing, passing of responsibility. Around them, the battle was ending. Williams's soldiers rounded up surrendered gunmen. Townsfolk emerged from cover to help the wounded. Through the smoke came the thunder of hoofbeats, army reinforcements from Fort Wingate, arriving to find the fight already won. But Claire had eyes only for the grief on Kolar's face as Hostine Bigay breathed his last. She knelt beside them, her hand on Kolar's shoulder, sharing the weight of loss. "He died a warrior," Atsa said softly, appearing with water and bandages. "Protecting his people, there's honor in that." The cleanup took hours, counting the cost 3 defenders dead, 7 wounded, of Briggs's men. 6 dead, including their leader, 12 captured, the rest fled into the desert. The courthouse was damaged but standing. The evidence, protected by brave men and women, remained intact. As the sun reached its zenith, Standish was brought before Captain Morrison in chains. The former deputy looked smaller somehow, all his swagger gone. "I'll testify," he said without prompting. "Tell everything. Names, dates, bribes. Just don't hang me." "That's for the court to decide," Morrison said, "but cooperation will be noted." Claire found herself standing over Luther Briggs's body. Even in death, his face held that cold ambition that had driven so much suffering. She felt nothing, no satisfaction, no grief, just emptiness where fear used to live. "It's over," Kolar said beside her. "Is it?" She looked around at the damaged town, the grieving families, the long work of rebuilding ahead. "Feels like it's just beginning." He took her hand, not caring who saw. "Then we begin together." The funerals came at sunset. Christian and Navajo tradition side by side. Josiah's voice reading scripture while Navajo singers sent spirits home. Claire stood with the mourners, no longer an outsider but part of the community forged in fire and blood. Young Thomas Bigay, still scarred from the warehouse fire, stood straight and proud as they laid his grandfather to rest. When the ceremony ended, he approached Kolar. "Grandfather said you would teach me," the boy said in careful English, "to track, to shoot, to protect our people." Kolar knelt to meet his eyes. "When you're ready." "I'm ready now." "No," Kolar said gently. "First you grieve, first you grow. Then, when the time comes, I'll teach you everything I know." As the gathering dispersed, Claire noticed something remarkable. Soldiers helped Navajo families load wagons. Townspeople who'd barely acknowledged each other before shared food and comfort. Even Murphy was there, awkwardly offering credit at his store to families affected by the fighting. "Look at that," Doña Marta said, wonder in her voice. "Who would have believed it?" Crisis reveals character. Sarah Cole observed, "Sometimes for worse, but today for better." Captain Morrison found Claire as the stars appeared. "The prosecutor wants you in Santa Fe next week, final depositions before trial." "We'll be there," Claire promised. All of you, Morrison emphasized. Mr. Nez's testimony will be crucial. The government wants to make an example show that land fraud won't be tolerated, regardless of the victim's race. After he left, Claire and Kolar walked to the edge of town, finding solitude beneath the vast desert sky. The events of the day seemed surreal, like something from a dime novel rather than real life. Your father will hear about this, Kolar said. About us. I'll write to him tomorrow. Claire decided, tell him everything. He'll either accept it or he won't, but I'm done hiding. And if he doesn't accept? Claire looked up at the stars, thinking of all the choices that had brought her here. Then I'll grieve that loss, but I won't change who I've become, who we've become. Kolar pulled her close, and they stood together watching the night. Somewhere in the darkness, coyotes sang their ancient songs. The sound no longer seemed threatening, but part of the land's own voice, wild and free and enduring. I love you, Claire said, the words coming easily now. Despite everything, because of everything, I love you. And I love you, he replied. My unexpected gift, my stubborn teacher who shoots straight and speaks truth. They kissed under the stars while the town behind them settled into exhausted peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, trials, rebuilding, the slow work of changing hearts and minds. But tonight, they had each other and the knowledge that when evil came calling, good people had stood together. The war for Coyote Bend was won, paid for in blood and courage. Now came the harder battle, building a future where such wars weren't necessary, where children like Thomas Begay could grow up without losing grandfathers to other men's greed, where love could cross any boundary. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But standing there in Kolar's arms, listening to the desert's night music, Claire knew they would try. Together, they would try. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and patient, watching as they always had, and below, two hearts beat as one, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. 6 months had passed since the battle at Coyote Bend. The courthouse stood repaired now, its walls bearing faint scars like memories of violence. Claire adjusted her new dress, a gift from the women's sewing circle that had formed after the battle, and watched the morning sun paint the desert gold. The town had changed. Where suspicion once ruled, cautious cooperation grew. The new sheriff, elected fairly with votes from all communities, was James Morrison, the captain who'd chosen justice over convenience. Josiah Cole served as deputy, bridging divides with his steady presence. Ready? Sarah asked, pinning the last flower in Claire's hair. You look beautiful. Nervous, Claire admitted. Is that normal? Honey, if you weren't nervous, I'd worry. Sarah smiled. But you're sure this path you're choosing? I've never been more certain of anything. The schoolhouse, rebuilt larger than before, served as the gathering place. Claire had insisted on this instead of a church, wanting a space that belonged to everyone. As she entered, she saw the impossible made real. Navajo families beside townspeople, soldiers next to shepherds, all here to witness something new. Kolar waited at the front, wearing his finest, a mixture of traditional Navajo dress and frontier formal that somehow looked perfectly right. His eyes found hers across the crowd, and the warmth there steadied her racing heart. Patrick O'Hara sat in the front row, his weathered face unreadable. He'd arrived yesterday, thinner than she remembered but clear-eyed. The trial had cleared his debts and revealed the extent of Briggs's schemes. He was free now, but freedom hadn't erased the distance between father and daughter. Dearly beloved, Josiah began, his voice carrying easily through the room. We gather today to witness something extraordinary, not just the union of two people, but the joining of two worlds. Claire barely heard the words, lost in Kolar's eyes. They'd written their own vows, blending traditions, creating something new like everything else in their life together. I, Claire O'Hara, take you, Kolar Nez, as my husband, she said, voice strong despite her nerves. I promise to stand beside you against all storms, to learn your language as you've learned mine, to honor your ancestors while we build our future. You saw me when I was lost and helped me find my way. Now my path is yours, today and always." Kolar's voice was deep with emotion as he responded, Kolar Nez, take you, Claire O'Hara, as my wife. You came into my life like sunrise after the longest night, bringing hope I thought was lost forever. I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because it's my honor to try, to teach you the old ways while we create new ones, to love you as the desert loves the rain with patience, gratitude, and endless wonder. Atsa stepped forward with a blanket she'd woven specially. The pattern told their story in abstract designs, mountains and stars, fire and water, paths converging into one road forward. She draped it around their shoulders, binding them in warmth and tradition. "In my people's way," Kolar explained to the mixed gathering, "the blanket represents the home we'll build, the life we'll share. All who see us will know we are one." When Josiah pronounced them married, when they kissed to cheers in multiple languages, Claire felt the world shift into place. This was right. This was home. The celebration spilled into the streets. Tables groaned under food from every culture: Navajo fry bread, Mexican tamales, Sarah's fried chicken, even egg rolls from the Chang family. Musicians played. Children ran between the adults. And for one golden afternoon, Coyote Bend felt like the future. Claire found a moment with her father as the sun began its descent. They sat on the boarding house steps, watching Kolar teach young Thomas Bigay a traditional dance. "He's a good man," Patrick said finally. "Yes, not what I planned for you." "Nothing in my life has gone according to plan." Claire studied her father's profile. "Are you angry?" Patrick was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then when I got your letter, I raged. My only daughter, throwing away respectability, choosing a hard path." He sighed. "But then I thought about your mother, how she defied her family to marry an Irish Catholic. How happy she was despite the hardship." "I remember her laughing," Claire said softly. "Always laughing. That woman, even at the end." Patrick took her hand, calloused fingers gentle. "I see her in you, that same stubborn courage, that same wild heart." He squeezed gently. "Be happy, Mostor. That's all I want now." The Irish endearment, my treasure, brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, Da!" As evening came, the newlyweds made their rounds, accepting congratulations and gifts. Doña Marta pressed a small wooden cross into Claire's hands. "For protection," she said, then winked. "Though you seem to protect yourself well enough." Williams, now a sergeant, shook Kolar's hand firmly. "An honor to know you, sir, both of you." Even Murphy, transformed by the town's changes, offered credit at his store. "For setting up housekeeping," he said gruffly. "Interest-free. Imagine that." As the stars emerged, Claire and Kolar slipped away to the small adobe house at the town's edge, their wedding gift from the community, built by many hands. Inside, Atsa had prepared everything with loving care. Candles flickered, casting warm shadows. The bed was piled with quilts, the table set with simple dishes. "Our home," Claire marveled. "Our beginning," Kolar corrected. They came together in the candlelight with a passion born of patience, of danger survived and trust earned. When he kissed her, Claire tasted promise. When she touched his scars, old and new, she wrote vows with her fingertips. They loved with the intensity of those who've nearly lost everything, who know how precious each moment is. Later, wrapped in the wedding blanket and each other, they talked of dreams. The school would expand. Kolar would guide for the army, but also teach young Navajo men alternatives to violence. Claire would document the real history of the territory, ensuring truth survived alongside legend. "No regrets?" Kolar asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "None," Claire said firmly. Though I do wonder what Luther Briggs would think, seeing us now. Nothing. He's beyond thinking. Kolar's voice held no satisfaction, just fact. But his legacy remains. Others will come. Then we'll face them together. A coyote called in the distance, that wild sound that had once frightened her. Now it seemed like a blessing, a reminder that some things couldn't be tamed, shouldn't be tamed. Like a love that crossed boundaries, like hope that survived violence, like two people who'd found each other across impossible odds. Morning would bring new challenges. The railroad would keep pushing. Prejudice wouldn't die overnight. There would be those who saw their marriage as betrayal, who would make their lives difficult in 1,000 small ways. But tonight, they had each other in a community that had chosen unity over division. They had friends who'd bled beside them and a future they'd write themselves. Claire rose to blow out the candles, pausing at the window. Coyote Bend slept peacefully, a few lights still glowing where celebrations continued. Somewhere, Atsa was probably weaving, adding new chapters to her patterns. Josiah and Sarah were tucking their children into bed with stories of the day. Life went on, richer for being shared. "Come back to bed," Kolar called softly. She returned to his arms, to their nest of blankets and promises. Outside, the desert stretched endless under stars, harsh and beautiful and eternal. Inside, two hearts beat as one, writing their own story of what America could be, not perfect, but always striving, not without conflict, but committed to resolution. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "And I love you," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, always." They slept entwined while the desert nights sang around them. In the morning, they would rise to face the world together. But for now, they had this each other, their love, and the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, hope wins. The blue cloth from their first meeting lay on the dresser, carefully preserved, but they didn't need it anymore. They'd woven something stronger, a life, a family, a future that belonged to both of them and neither of them and everyone who'd stood with them. In Coyote Bend, the war had ended. The peace, hard-won and fragile, had begun, and in a small adobe house at the edge of tomorrow, two souls who'd found each other across the divide celebrated the greatest victory of all. Love, simple, complicated, enduring love. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient witnesses to the eternal story, and below, in the land of red rock and wide sky, a new chapter began, not an ending, but a gateway to all the adventures yet to come. Because this is how the world changes, one heart, one choice, one courageous love at a time, until the desert blooms and the walls come down, until justice flows like water and mercy like rain, until there is no them and us, only we. Together, always together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below where in the world you're enjoying these Wild West tales. And let's connect over our shared love of these frontier stories. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Tales. Hit that like button. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover these tales of love and courage in the American frontier. Your support means everything.